Hey everybody, my name is Thomas Coons. I'm a former senior intelligence officer and advisor to the Deputy Director for National Intelligence, and I'm the founder of Citizens Watch Floor, a libertarian leading civilian intelligence cell that's focused on three mission areas. The first, exposing government, NGO, special interest, and revolving door corruption. Two, monitoring and assessing the current World War now. And three, evaluating the U.S. media for bias and corruption, leveraging a proprietary method that we adapted from the U.S. Analytic Integrity Standards. These are standards used to evaluate intelligence reports and communications for clarity, logic, analytic rigor, and signs for deception and bias. Which brings us to Citizens Watch Floor's first monthly report. After a successful analytic and human support career, when I was in the IC, I moved on to lead analytic quality and operational performance efforts. I've conducted a ton of quality evaluations in both agency and IC level reports, assessments, evaluations, you name it. I've looked at it and evaluated it for quality. I then went on to create and lead the Defense Intelligence Agency's first enterprise-wide analysis evaluation program. When I started Citizens Watch Floor and I was looking for the first project, I decided to look into the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails after the first assassination attempt on Trump in Butler, PA. The reason why I decided to start with the public statement was that first, I hadn't read it before, and two, I'm familiar with and know most of the people who authored the product and many of the people who signed on to the product. When I did review it, I realized that it was so poorly written and misleading for the audience, which was the American people, that my only conclusion was that it was a blatant attempt to mislead and confuse the reader. It was a demonstration of what I'll call intelligence malpractice by people who knew exactly what they were doing and they knew better. This then caused me to look deeper into the project's origin, its production, and the publication process. I went through the statement itself with a fine-tooth comb and evaluated it using the analytic standards. I reviewed testimonies of the people who were involved and were willing to give them. I reviewed their bios, media reports, and anything that I could get my hands on. And the reality of it is the correct assessment at the time, based on all of the available sources of information, was that the laptop was most likely not a Russian information operation. But I found and discovered that the authors of the document never sought all of the information. They purposely ignored evidence. Which leads me to believe that the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails was a deception operation conducted against the American people. I'm going to get into my research findings, but first I want to remind folks that in October of 2020, the New York Post broke a story about Hunter Biden and his laptop and emails that had been leaked to the press. These emails showed possible influence peddling on behalf of Hunter for access to his father, Joe Biden. 5 days after that New York Post story broke, 51 former intelligence professionals signed, using their former titles, a public statement that said that the emails had the earmarks of a Russian information operation. But let's look at what the FBI knew about the laptop and the emails at the time these intelligence professionals published their statement. So, what did the FBI know? Well, they knew about the laptop since 2019, almost a year before the New York Post story broke, and they actually took possession of the laptop via subpoena because it showed evidence of crimes. They knew that the laptop and the emails on it belonged to Hunter Biden. They knew that the laptop and the emails showed no signs of Russian tampering. And they knew that there was evidence of crimes on the laptop because they themselves were using it as evidence in cases that they had been building against Hunter Biden since 2018. Oh, and they also knew about the Burisma email asking Hunter to use his influence to help remove a Ukrainian prosecutor. And they knew about the Burisma email thanking Hunter for the introduction to his father, Joe Biden. And they also knew that Joe Biden threatened to withhold $1 billion to Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor. And they knew about the Burisma email back to Hunter thanking him for his help. And they knew that a meeting with Hunter's business partners that Joe Biden said never took place actually took place. All of this stuff was known by the federal government, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the IRS, who also had an investigation ongoing into Hunter, at the time that the intelligence professionals made their public statement. Whether or not Russia was involved with Hunter's laptop was the FBI's call as a counterintelligence issue. But the funny thing is, none of the authors of the public statement checked with the FBI. Matter of fact, none of the 51 who signed on checked with the FBI. Even worse, no one checked with their FBI friends or their professional networks that these people with long storied careers in national security and intelligence have. They never looked into any of the information from the FBI. 3 of them still had active clearances and not one checked classified information. Primary author of the document, Mike Morrell, who was a former deputy director of the CIA and former head of CIA analysis, he relied on a USA Today story with an unnamed source rather than reach out to the FBI. Under his testimony, he said that the Biden campaign certainly played a role in that USA Today story. So it begs questioning. When would intelligence experts write a confusing and misleading statement with a high risk for misinterpretation without doing their due diligence? Which leads me to believe that the entire effort to produce and publish the statement was a deception operation because it conveyed selected information and indicators and it influenced voters' motives and their objective reasoning. But through my research, I've identified what actually makes this a deception operation. And let's go into those items now. First of all, it was an organized effort with work conducted by a group of trained intelligence professionals. This wasn't a spontaneous effort where a handful of people got together and decided to do something because they were concerned. This was an organized and planned effort with various stages of drafting, editing, consternation, and the creation of a public statement that leveraged intelligence tradecraft. It was made by a group of trained intelligence professionals who relied on their knowledge of manipulation and deception tactics and tradecraft in the production, publication, and most damningly and evidently in the public statement itself. From its origins, the project's goal and intention was to secretly manipulate unwitting victims, in this case, the American people. Bidens knew the laptop was legitimate and the information on it true, and the Biden campaign knew that it was true. In his testimony, Mike Morrell, like I said, the primary author, said that the impetus for him to organize and write the statement was a visit from senior Biden campaign member Antony Blinken, who is a longtime Biden team member and who went on to be Biden's Secretary of State. After their initial conversation, Blinken forwarded Morrell the USA Today story, which would become the only FBI evidence that the public statement uses, rather than actually reach out to the FBI. The campaign's involvement in the statement was hidden from the American people, and I have a feeling it was hidden from the majority of the 51 signers, although all of the 51 knew that the statement was being written to help Joe Biden in his final debate with Trump. Additionally, as I said, this wasn't a spontaneous, organized group. They had a command and control structure. And the known members at the leadership level were Antony Blinken, Mike Morrell, and I know that there were others in the shadows because Morrell testified that Blinken was the only person in the campaign he was working with. But then he also mentioned that the campaign made several important edits to the public statement, And they also provided instructions on who in the media to give the statement to, but he conveniently couldn't remember who those people were. The control level was responsible for executing the plan to meet the operational goals. At this level, we have Mike Morell, Mark Polymeropoulos, who is a former intelligence operations specialist who provided some initial bullets to Morell, and Kristen Wood, a longtime former aide to Morell who helped with some of the coordination and recruitment to get people to sign on to the letter. And lastly, within that control group, I would put Nick Shapiro, who was a former Obama crisis communications lead who followed John Brennan, former CIA director, to CIA. And Nick was responsible for handing the statement off to the media, and he did it misleadingly. Additionally, there was a group of useful idiots who were most of the signers. They knew that it was at least political, but they may not have known that the campaign was directing the operational elements of this. There was secrecy, deception, and manipulation in the production and publication process. In the production, Morell didn't tell people that he tried to recruit that he was closely coordinating with the campaign. He used deceptive language to try to push the public statement through CIA review for unclassified information. And as I stated before, he doesn't remember who made some important edits to the document. They basically removed an entire paragraph that would have been more fair-minded, but someone from the campaign removed that statement, and Morell can't remember who. In the publication process, the campaign provided instructions on which reporter they wanted to get the public statement first. Morell doesn't remember who made that request either. And Nick Shapiro, the crisis communications expert and John Brennan underling, misrepresented what the public statement actually said when he sent it to 3 biased reporters and media outlets. The first report that became public came from the same journalist that broke the 2016 story about the Trump-Russia collusion that we now know was planted information as well. Most damaging is the deception, tradecraft, and manipulation tactics found in the statement itself. First of all, they ignored or never sought the key piece of intelligence or evidence because it contradicted the operation's goal. Not one person checked with the FBI. Their statement contradicted the director of national intelligence at the time. In their statement, they use concrete language and certainty while admitting they have no evidence to back up their claims. And there's evidence of textbook deception tradecraft. Things like anchoring, emotional charges, repetition, the use of confusing and contradictory language, and unclear writing and poor argumentation are evident throughout the public statement. Just to highlight some of the things, there are 13 paragraphs in the public statement, and I've identified a list of 10 items that show efforts to manipulate and deceive the American people. After all of my analysis and review, I made my own final assessment. And I assessed that the Letter of 51 was a coordinated deception operation conducted against the American people. The public statement and the coordinated effort to produce and publish it show clear signs of secrecy, manipulation, and deception tradecraft designed to mislead the reader, in this case, the American people. Their goal wasn't to warn, their goal was to manipulate and unduly influence the 2020 presidential election, regardless of the truth. If you're interested in sticking around for the line-by-line review, that'll be following this video. Otherwise, check out more from us at Citizens Watch Floor at our YouTube channel. Thanks again. Before we get into the line by line review of the document, I just wanted to make a couple upfront comments just so people understand the gravity of the situation that we have. If you're not familiar with the intelligence community, I think that this will help put it in context. First of all, intelligence is a profession with a special expertise that we call a tradecraft. And a tradecraft is a set of skills that's developed over time through a combination of training, education, exposure, and experience. And it's all backed with a professional code of ethics and an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We also make a promise to speak truth to power while remaining apolitical. It's our jobs to bring in unbiased opinions and insights in order to help the decision makers, regardless of their party affiliation. A group of former intelligence professionals that will leverage their titles and role to gain the trust of the American people while publishing a statement with the purpose to deceive the people in favor of one party is not politics as usual. This isn't the normal, typical DC way of doing business. For intelligence professionals, it's a violation of personal and professional integrity. This was a group of trained intelligence professionals that used their knowledge of intelligence tradecraft, including an understanding of psychology, to manipulate and deceive American voters. The CIA has conducted tons of research into psychology, and intelligence professionals, we use it to, among other things, first, mitigate our biases when conducting analysis to ensure that we remain fair minded. We also use it to manipulate and coerce human sources to betray their countries and help the United States. And it's used to conduct influence operations around the globe, overt, clandestine, and covert. This group used that expertise to unduly influence the American people by producing and publishing the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails. They did it in secrecy with manipulation in mind while leveraging their expertise and knowledge of deception tradecraft. That means taking advantage of reader psychology. It's disgusting. What you're looking at is my highlighted version of the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails. I decided it'd be faster if I just pulled up this version and talked through just some of the things that I want to highlight. What I'm going to be pointing out here is the evidence that I found of manipulation and deception tradecraft in the statement. There are 13 paragraphs, and I found 10 different things that I want to highlight that show you what they did and how they tried to manipulate and deceive you, the American voter, who this document is directed at. The first three paragraphs are really about the setup and the conditioning. This is them, one that's their opportunity to introduce themselves to you, to gain credibility, and to kind of charge you to listen to what they're about to say. And so you look at the first paragraph. We are all individuals who devoted significant portions of our lives to national security. Some of us have served in senior positions in policy departments and agencies, and some of us served in senior positions in the intelligence community. Some of us were political appointees, and some of us were career officials. Many of us worked for presidents of both political parties. So, right out the gate, they're letting you know that they are all people who are devoted to national security, and they've spent their entire lives doing it. They're communicating that these are senior level folks. These aren't junior folks. These are folks who run agencies, and they also make a specific point to highlight their senior positions in the intelligence community. But it's this last sentence where they say, many of us worked for presidents of both political parties. This is them trying to convey that they are unbiased, that they have dedicated, they're great govies, they're great civil servants, they've devoted, right? That word, devoted significant portions of their lives to national security, and we've served both parties. But the reality is, this is the first sign of deception in the document, because while they might be trying to convince you they're apolitical, We know from the recruitment letter that Mike Morrell sent out to the potential signers of the document that he owned up front that the purpose of this statement was to give Joe Biden a talking point for the debate. Now, I'm arguing that the entire thing was a deception operation, and I do think that it was a small group that was organized that were clued in or read into the fact that this was actually a deception operation. I do think that the majority of the signers were probably useful idiots, and they just had an anti-Trump bias that Morrell took advantage of. So either way, anyone who put their name to this document, it's at least a political event. So the fact that they're trying to convince you that they are apolitical because they served both parties, we know that's a sign of deception. So when you look at our little scorecard over here, first item that I'm going to point out, deception tradecraft, what they've done in the statement, we're going to make a little tally. Number one, they falsely established their unbiased credibility and national security expertise. Yes, no doubt they have national security expertise, but it's not unbiased. And they tried to convince you right out the gate that this was not a political statement, which we know for a fact that it was. Now, the second paragraph, we are all also individuals who see Russia as one of our nation's primary adversaries. All of us have an understanding of the wide range of Russian overt and covert activities that undermine U.S. national security, with some of us knowing Russian behavior intimately as we work to defend our nation against it for a career. A few of us worked against Russian information operations in the United States in the last several years. I'd point your attention to the first sentence. We are all also individuals who see Russia as one of our nation's primary adversaries. The purpose of the wording in that opening statement is to condition your mindset into an agreeable state. So notice that they didn't say mention a controversial statement. They said something that everyone is going to agree with. They said that Russia is one of our nation's primary adversaries. They didn't say Russia is the primary adversary because somebody might disagree with that. They might say, you know what, I think terrorism is. And immediately that mind shift goes into not a combative, but an adversarial mindset that makes a mind more closed to accept and receive the argument that they're about to present. Now, these are psychological tricks that a lot of other professions use. Like it's salespeople use this, but in the intelligence community, it's used as well, and it is an element of tradecraft. Create a statement that you're going to agree with to put your mindset into an agreeable state and more receptive to the argument that they're going to put forth. They also mention a wide range of Russian overt and covert activities, and they mention that they have intimate knowledge of Russian behavior. So I don't think most people know what overt and covert is. So that's probably a technical term that a lot of Americans aren't familiar with, but it sounds like it's inside speak, right? And if you're from the outside looking in and you're not familiar with the intelligence community and you're not familiar with national security, and they drop some, I'll say, technical language, also noting that they have intimate knowledge of behavior, they are setting you up to so that you'll accept them as not only the national security experts that they mentioned in the first paragraph, but they're unbiased national security experts who also have Russian expertise. Oh, in the last sentence, they point out that they've worked against Russian information operations inside the United States in the last several years. And that's kind of what they're anchoring their argument on, is the fact that they're trying to convince you that what transpired with the Hunter Biden laptop and the release of those emails was a Russian information operation in the United States. And hey, why wouldn't you believe them? Because they already told you they're the unbiased experts. We know that they were absolutely deceiving you. So if we jump back over to our scorecard, if you will, You'll see, okay, so what do they do at the gate? They falsely establish their unbiased credibility and national security. And now with these next paragraphs, the second thing that they did is they anchored you to the Russian information operations threat and their expertise against it. And they did one other thing in that too, so I'll add a third element. They manipulated you to be in an agreeable mindset so that you'd be more receptive to the argument that they're going to present. Again, this is psychology. The intelligence community, especially the CIA, has done tons of research into psychology, how the brain works, how mindsets shift. In the analytic world, we use this and our knowledge of bias so that we can mitigate against it. So we're producing apolitical and unbiased works for decision makers. If you want to use that power for a more nefarious activity, you start to get into CIA recruiting people to be spies and deceiving and manipulating them to coerce them into doing things that we want them to be doing. You also use that knowledge when you're operating and conducting psyops and deception operations or and other types of influence campaigns in foreign countries. And the CIA and the intelligence community does those things as well. So the expertise and the knowledge to deceive groups of people, this group definitely had that expertise. Let's switch back to our document and scroll down a little bit. Note the use of italics in the third paragraph. And I'm going to highlight there are a couple other paragraphs that use italics, and each one of them is an emotional statement. And the purpose of the emotional statement is to get you to be an emotionally charged state, right? Like they want you agreeable and they want you motivated and caring about what they're going to say. So they use these tactics to kind of, again, create a little bit of a fervor in you. They say, perhaps most important, each of us believes deeply that the American citizens should determine the outcome of elections, not foreign governments. All of us agree with the founding fathers' concern about the damage that foreign interference in our politics can do to our democracy. And in that opening statement, there are two things I want to point out. The first is the very first words, perhaps most important. So they're letting you know that they, the experts, the unbiased experts who've devoted significant portions of their life to national security, believe that this next sentence the statement that they make is the most important. And they believe deeply. Again, this is emotional language that you normally wouldn't see in a more logical intelligence product, but you would see it if you're trying to influence people. But anyway, each of us believes deeply that American citizens should determine the outcome of elections, not foreign governments. This again is another statement to make you or the reader agreeable, right? Because nobody's going to disagree with that. Who doesn't believe that American citizens should determine the outcome of elections and not foreign governments? We're all going to agree with that. Now, most people probably aren't aware about what the founding fathers thought, but that's purposeful as well. They are attaching this to America, democracy, apple pie, all of that, and those damn Russians who are trying to influence what's going on in this country. When the ironic thing is that this is the group who is being dishonest and trying to influence your mindset and how you vote. So there's an ethical dilemma here because Russia didn't have a role in the Hunter Biden laptop. But this is the ethical question that they're avoiding. What's worse? A foreign government telling you the truth about a candidate that ends up influencing an election, or a party and group of intelligence professionals hiding the truth? Is it better if Americans hide and corrupt the truth to influence an election? Because that's what the 51 did. We know they're avoiding that ethical discussion because we know what was edited out of an earlier draft. Now, this is an important edit that Mike Morrell says he doesn't remember who made, which I think is a lie, because I think you would remember something like this. And this is the statement that was cut out of the document. And just the opening, For those who argue that it is important for the truth to come out, even if it comes at the cost of foreign interference, let us share our understanding of what transpired between Vice President Biden and the Ukrainians. It's not what Biden's opponents want Americans to think. They go on to then explain the Biden's work, that Joe Biden's work to remove the Ukrainian prosecutor that happened to be the same prosecutor Hunter's business partners wanted removed. The paragraph argues that it didn't have anything to do with Hunter Biden. It had to do with Obama's focus on tackling corruption in Ukraine. We know that Joe Biden had meetings with Hunter's business associates that he denied having. We know that he said he had no knowledge of Hunter's business dealings that we now know to be a lie. There's been so much lying and deception related to this event. I'm of the mindset that the Bidens are dirty as hell and everyone is covering it up, including these intelligence professionals. So, the perhaps most important, another sign of deception and manipulation. So, if we jump back to our scorecard, it adds another number 4. They told you what the most important danger is, and they're the experts, especially on Russia, devoted their careers, they're unbiased, and they are telling you that the most important danger is foreign interference in our democracy. So this is planted information for effect. They purposely cut out a more fair-minded paragraph that would have presented a truer version of the dilemma, but that's not what they want. It's not about you thinking and coming to your own conclusion. They're trying to push you in a certain direction, and that's where their deception and manipulation comes in. It is for all these reasons that we write to say that the arrival on the U.S. political scene of emails purportedly belonging to the Vice President Biden's son Hunter, much of it related to his time serving on the board of Ukrainian gas company Burisma, has all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. That the first statement there, that it is for all these reasons, what reasons have they actually provided? They gave us their expertise. They gave us what they thought was most damaging, but there aren't really reasons as to why they're saying that this has all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. And for those who aren't aware, earmarks, just think of characteristics. So they're saying that the the arrival of the emails in the New York Post story has all the characteristics of a Russian information operation. In paragraph number 5, they say, we want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement, just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government has played a significant role in this case. And there's some juicy bits in here I want to point out. They open by pretending that they're being honest, right? We want to emphasize that we don't know if the emails are genuine or not. But then they discredit them by stating they were provided by Trump's personal attorney. They then admit they don't have any evidence, just that their experience makes them not suspicious, but deeply suspicious that the Russian government not played a role, played a significant role in this case. The truth is, they could have sought evidence and learned the truth, but they purposely chose not to. Obviously, I think a lot of them knew the truth and knew that this was deception. Either way, nobody that signed it. They did not check with the FBI, and many of them could have. They didn't even check their FBI networks, that if you spend a career devoted to national security and you've been head of the agencies, you have FBI networks. You didn't check with anybody, even though the call, whether or not the laptop showed any signs of tampering, or any signs of Russian involvement was the FBI. You're going to publish this statement so close to a debate in a presidential election, and you're not going to check with anybody? The three people with clearances never checked classified information, and they could have. Mike Morrell, the primary organizer, still had a clearance. Hell, he had a CIA contract at the time and made this statement. Former Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, he chose not to seek classified information. And when they asked Clapper during his testimony why he chose not to get a classified briefing that he could have, he said he didn't want to be tainted by it. Then he quickly retracted that because he realized how that sounds, and it sounds exactly that. He did not want to be tainted by classified information because he did not want anyone to be able to prove that he knew the truth, because many of these folks who knew the truth are operating off of plausible deniability, another sign that this was a deception operation. Their use of language like deeply suspicious and a significant role when you've just claimed that you do not have any evidence is not within best intelligence tradecraft. We would not use that language. Their argument that they end up stringing together, and we're going to get into that, is the assessment that they're making would be a low confidence assessment, but his product would never get out for publication in any analytics shop that I've ever been a part of. It's that poorly written and that poorly argued. So with those two paragraphs, let's jump over to our scorecard again and let's add a couple elements that we've identified. So we go from told you that the most important danger is foreign interference, and then the next thing they did was they told you that the release of the emails has all the earmarks or characteristics of a Russian information operation, and that information is planted for effect. And then the other thing that they did was they discredited the Hunter emails in the New York Post by attaching them to Giuliani's bias as Trump's attorney, but they never mitigated their own bias, and they're misrepresenting themselves as unbiased as well. So we know that this was at least a political statement. Organizers and the leadership levels of this operation definitely knew the truth and were deceiving the American voters. Let's jump back over into the document. If we are right, this is Russia trying to influence how Americans vote in this election, and we believe strongly that Americans need to be aware of this. If we are right, well, they already told you that they're the experts who devoted their lives to national security and that they're unbiased. So who would the layman be to not believe these fine folks? Yeah, well, we know better, don't we? And notice the use of concrete language. This is Russia trying to influence how Americans vote. Yeah, if we are right, well, if their tradecraft is working, you're convinced that these people are unbiased and fair, then you would just believe this next statement, right? This is Russia trying to influence how Americans vote. And guess what? They believe strongly that you need to be aware of this. Funny how strongly they believe that, but they don't believe strongly in actually looking for the truth or finding the evidence necessary to put out a fair-minded statement. The fact is that it's this group, they're the ones that are influencing an election. The useful idiots, they at least know that it's helping one candidate over another. They were not transparent with the reader. That is misleading. Even the useful idiots are deceitfully influencing the election. The organizers, leaders, and control elements knew this was all deception from the moment it started with Blinken's visit to Mike Morrell. It's disgusting and outrageous. And these people, they're sworn to the ethics of the profession, and they took an oath. They then say there are a number of factors that make us suspicious of Russian involvement, and they're getting ready to present their evidence that makes them think that the Russians were involved in this. They've already admitted they have no evidence. And a reminder, they didn't seek any of the information out that would contradict what they wanted their message to be. They never tried to tell the truth. They never did their due diligence. They misrepresented their intentions. From the useful idiots that signed to the organizers, the leaders, and the control elements, this was a crooked operation from the get go. Their first paragraph of evidence: such an operation would be consistent with Russian objectives as outlined publicly and recently by the intelligence community to create political chaos in the United States and to deepen political divisions here, but also undermine the candidacy of former Vice President Biden, thereby help the candidacy of Trump. For the Russians at this point, with Trump down in the polls, there's incentive for Moscow to pull out the stops to do anything possible to help Trump win and or to weaken Biden should he win. A laptop op fits the bill, as the publication of the emails are clearly designed to discredit Biden. As an analyst, I always hated the statement "would be consistent with" because it immediately triggers a counter in my brain. What else is it consistent with? In the intelligence community, there's a technique called, analysis of competing hypotheses, where you lay things out kind of like the scientific method, where you try to disprove various hypotheses based on the evidence. And what you find is that things are consistent with a lot of stuff. So them saying it's consistent with Russian objectives, you know what else the laptop's consistent with? Hunter being a piece of shit. Hunter's character. It's consistent with Hunter's character, especially when we know that the FBI had been investigating him since 2018, that the FBI had the laptop since 2019, that they already verified that it showed no signs of Russian tampering in 2019, and all of this statement was published about almost a year after the FBI learned all of that. And yeah, the laptop is consistent with Hunter Biden's character and his past. So yeah, the laptop is consistent with a lot of things. Their use of laptop op, like it's insider information, it's a little bit benign, but that too is it's a laptop op. And then the last sentence there, where they're saying the publication of the emails are clearly designed, sends a message of a little bit of a conspiracy and plotting to help make their case. And we know that the only ones who are making a case here is them, because they chose to not include all of the evidence that was available to them. So if we jump back into our scorecard, I think we got a couple more to add. Let's do number 7. So they've told you now concretely if they're right, and why wouldn't they be? Because they're the experts, they're the unbiased experts, they're devoted. Russia is trying to influence voters. It's disinformation because they ignored contrary evidence that the primary author at least knew was out there. And number 8, they provided you with weak evidence while ignoring the best evidence available, because that best evidence contradicts their argument and their deception operation. A little scrolling. Such an operation would be consistent with some of the key methods Russia has used in its now multi-year operation to interfere in our democracy: the hacking via cyber operations and the dumping of accurate information or the distribution of inaccurate or misinformation. Russia did both of these during the 2016 presidential election, judgments shared by the U.S. intelligence community, the investigation into Russian activities by special counsel Robert Mueller, and the entirety, all Republicans and Democrats, on the current Senate Intelligence Committee. They're still making their case rather than provide evidence or analysis. None of this evidence yet directly ties Russia with the Hunter Biden laptop. They're discussing the games nations play. Look, I've seen this overblown in the media. All nations participate and try to influence other nations' elections just based on their preferences for economic and foreign policy and all of the things at the top levels of the geopolitical game. Nations try to influence other nations with both soft and hard power, with both open and secret activities and initiatives. Many of the signers of the statement have played roles trying to influence foreign elections. One is one of the reasons why they know how to do it, and it's part of the job that they've done for the US government. Russia hacks us, we hack them, China hacks, North Korea hacks, Iran hacks, Israel hacks, the Brits hack. Everybody has these types of operations, but they've pushed it to the forefront because they keep trying to tie Trump to Russia. It's also well known that the Russians just didn't try to help Trump. They also tried to help Bernie Sanders and Jill Stein, the Green Party candidates, as well. Russia's 2016 involvement had more to do with their anti Hillary stance than it had to do with anybody else. But the Democrats and many members of the establishment we're seeing are trying to tie Trump to Russia, even though they haven't presented one bit of evidence yet that he's been colluding with Russia or Putin at any time. People also forget Hillary and Putin's public sparring before the 2016 election and during the periods where she was Secretary of State for Obama. Times like when she was pushing for the no-fly zone in Syria that was in direct opposition to Russia, and the personal attacks that Hillary and Putin were both doing in the media. The next paragraph. Such an operation is also consistent with several data points. The Russians, according to media reports and cybersecurity experts, targeted Burisma late last year for cyber collection and gained access to its emails. And Ukrainian politician and businessman Andrei Derkash, identified and sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department for being a 10-year Russian agent interfering in the 2020 election, passed purported materials on Burisma and Hunter Biden to Giuliani. No information about what was stolen or obtained from the Burisma phishing attack was released, but based on the reporting that has been published so far, it appears that it was a smaller scale phishing attack with little results. But it's obviously clear that they're trying to create doubt in the reader's mind and tie that hack to the New York Post story. To be fair, Giuliani was traveling overseas trying to dig up dirt on the Bidens. He was in contact with Derkash, so that absolutely is true. But the reality is there was dirt on the Bidens, and it did come out. And there is no evidence that Derkash or any other Russian hands were involved in the release of these emails. As a matter of fact, there's evidence, and the FBI already verified that the laptop showed no signs of tampering, but that's evidence that this group did not want out. Our view that the Russians are involved in the Hunter Biden email issue is consistent with two other significant data points as well. According to the Washington Post, citing four sources, U.S. intelligence agencies warned the White House last year that Giuliani was the target of an influence operation by Russian intelligence. Note the first few words there. Our view that the Russians are involved. Okay, I'm going to go back to, they've already said they have no evidence. So they're making their assessment and using concrete language. Our view that the Russians are involved. The evidence they present does not make that case to use that strong language, and we would never allow that in intelligence communications. They also say that it's consistent with two other significant data points. And I am telling you that reports from the Washington Post and the USA Today would never be seen as significant data points. Washington Post has an openly left-leaning bias, just like Fox has an openly right-leaning bias. So you're aware of the bias, you're aware of unnamed sources, and you put this quote in here. One, you would never say it's significant unless you're trying to say that you have insider information, which again is a deception tactic because you have insider information to the truth and you're ignoring it. So this is laughable that they would consider a Washington Post article a significant data point at the same time while you're ignoring the classified information or even the FBI information that would provide clarity to the issue. It's disgusting, to be honest. Even more disgusting is the next paragraph. In addition, media reports say that the FBI has now opened an investigation into Russian involvement in this case. According to the USA Today, federal authorities are investigating whether the material supplied to the New York Post by Rudy Giuliani is part of a smoke bomb of disinformation pushed by Russia. Well, that's just an outright lie because federal authorities were not investigating whether that material was Russian disinformation because the FBI had been using it as evidence against Hunter in their cases that they had against him. Morell admitted that the campaign certainly played a role in the writing and publication of that USA Today article, and yet he has the audacity to add it as the last piece of evidence in their argument that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. I mean, it's just ridiculous that they would use that as evidence to close out their argument. It's disgusting. So with that little nugget, we're going to jump over to our scorecard again, and we're going to add another sign of deception tradecraft. They ended the evidence chain with a Biden campaign planted story from the USA Today that lied about FBI activities connected to the laptop. An outright lie because they knew the truth about the laptop and about the emails. We'll go back to the closeout. Then they say, we do not know whether these press reports are accurate, but they do suggest concern within the executive branch departments and agencies that mirrors ours. It is high time that Russia stops interfering in our democracy. Note the italics again for the emotionally charged statement and their call to action. It's high time. But they do say that they don't know whether the press reports are accurate. Yeah, they do, because they planted one of them. So they knew one of them was false. They know one of them's false. They're lying. And then they're trying to arouse you with anger through emotion and say it's high time that Russia stops interfering in our democracy because that's what they want you focused on. They don't want you focused on the truth in the emails. They want you to be focused on their camouflage and their deceit campaign to make you believe that it's Russia involved in planting this information out there in public. So if we jump back to our scorecard, we add the final element. And what we're going to see is they manipulated you with a final emotionally charged message. So you'd be angry and discount any information from Hunter's laptop and a final call to action. So, like that says, they're also protecting themselves and Joe Biden from any future information that might get leaked from that laptop because they've already created the doubt in the American voter that this is Russia interfering and don't believe the information that's coming out. I think when you go back and you look at the entire report that was conducted, all three parts, I think it's pretty clear that this was a deception operation conducted against the American people. But I want to leave everybody with just one more thought on what we're actually dealing with here. And this isn't my definition, this is the definition of PSYOPs and deception operations, which are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their motives and objective reasoning and to ultimately influence their behavior. After all the evidence presented, did the public statement on the Hunter Biden emails convey selected information and indicators to influence voters' objective reasoning? The answer is it absolutely did. This isn't a public statement made by private citizens exercising their freedom of speech. These are trained intelligence professionals who knew the truth, who misled the American voter, that used deception tradecraft that the American taxpayers paid for them to obtain. It is disgusting. I think we need to talk about treason charges for some of these people. Revoking their clearances was a first good step. But obviously, when you look at it through the lens of these are intelligence professionals who conducted a deception operation against the American voter, I think there's still accountability that needs to be had. So I'll end with that. Thanks everyone for listening and watching, and I look forward to getting the next report out to you.